Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, everybody. Welcome to TPIM SR Live. This is the coming collapse. The coming collapse. You know, I want to thank you all for your support, watching the show, sharing the show, all that good stuff. But first and foremost, I want to start off the show with this bit right here. Let's start it. And this is really utterly disgusting, but let's start it.
I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? People have to see it first and then say it first. And I think that this is really underlined with a bold marker existing health issues in African-American communities.
It is. And the president today is acknowledging some of these disparities, and his administration is now promising to help these communities as much as possible. But some of these issues are persistent.
I just want to put in your head, the dude doing the report, when he gets to a certain part, you're going to see this level of happiness and damn near zeal. But let's continue.
Persistent issues, lower access to health care, living in places where the air and water might not be clean, living in places where it's hard to find affordable and fresh food. These are concerns that become greater in a crisis. And Lindsay, there's also the socioeconomic part of this. One thing I read today, most of the bus drivers in the city of Chicago are Black. Most of the food service workers are Latino. Those populations are struggling hard in all of this.
The Black and brown communities also on the front lines as well. And the bitter irony of this is that just a few weeks ago, there were these rampant myths.
No, the real bitter irony of it all, if Black folks had reparation, then they wouldn't be the food cook. They wouldn't be the janitor. They wouldn't be the guy picking up the trash outside, custodian, whatever. They wouldn't be the bus drivers in the taxi cab. That's the bitter irony. But let's let these clowns continue with their hate.
It's floating around online that Black people weren't even getting coronavirus.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was out there. The idea that our melanin would make us immune to the disease, but none of that, of course, is true, as we're seeing right now.
Steve Osunsami, thank you so much for that report.
Not really. Not really. Now let's get on with the real show. The coming collapse, y'all. Listen to the real information. Here it is right now.
As most of the news talks about enforcing mandatory lockdowns and handing out money to citizens, there has been a problem that has been rapidly expanding in the background of all of this news. And it is a problem that the world has never really seen before. In fact, it might create a crisis that won't just be felt in the next week, the next month, or even the next year, but it might be felt for several decades to come. During World War II, Britain was in the thick of war against the Axis powers. However, Britain ran into a roadblock. They were quickly running out of money. So they began looking to borrow money from both their own future taxpayers as well as the United States and Canada. In 1941, Britain began accepting loans and taking on debt to fund the war. And by 1945, Britain had taken on nearly $10 billion worth of debt from its creditors.
That's $10 billion of interest from 1945 all the way up until they finally paid it off.
At this point in time, Britain's debt to GDP ratio was a whopping 200%, meaning that the country had twice as much debt as its entire market value of all of its goods and services it produces over an entire year. And just some perspective for you is that the World Bank states that once a country reaches above 77% debt to GDP ratio, its economy will begin to slow down from such a large portion of its revenue going towards paying down its own debt. So after the war ended, Britain had amassed a debt that was so large that they couldn't pay it back in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or even 20 years. You see, on December 29th, 2006, Britain made its last payment on its World War II debt to the United States and Canada. This means that British taxpayers from 1945 up until 2006 had a small portion of their tax bill every single year go towards the debt that the country accumulated in the 1940s.
Peace and power, Nicholas. Welcome to the show. It's going good. I'm letting you guys in on the inside skivvy. While they got you all twisted and knotted, listening to all those reports, not understanding the real play. But here is the real play. Listen up, y'all. Sister Sandra, peace and power. Welcome to the show.
And for about a decade after World War II, Britain's economy was drastically hindered, in part due to their outstanding debt that they incurred. However, their economy eventually recovered thanks to an influx of taxpayers called the baby boomers, as well as some economic reforms and infrastructure investments. But you see, Britain was a little bit lucky. Most of the time, when a country accrues as much debt as Britain did during World War II, they are not so lucky. In 2001, Argentina's debt to GDP ratio reached a high of 166%, which caused the country to default on over $100 billion worth of debt. This default made capital move out of the country, and soon the nation saw millions of people enter poverty, while unemployment reached a high of 19%. And to this day, Argentina still hasn't fully recovered from its debt crisis that it went through nearly 20 years ago.
Wow. Right here. U.S. government bought all the bonds today. And then Carlos Garcia, where do you think all the homeless people are? I live in a metro Atlanta, and there seems to have mysteriously have disappeared. The same thing's happening in California. So I'm just curious. Brother, listen to that Ted Hayes video I did on my channel. Just go to the main channel, type in Ted Hayes, TPIM SR Live. They're rounding the people up, man. Homeless, useless eater, feral slaves are being rounded up and disappeared. It really is just that simple. Frederick, peace and power. Welcome to the show. Let's get back.
And similar stories can be heard around the globe. There was Greece in 2012, Zimbabwe in 2006, Venezuela in 2017, and Russia in 1998. The point I'm trying to make here is that even though debt can be a good thing to take on in order to solve today's serious problems, it will almost always have serious long-term consequences that could last for years or even decades. So now let's bring this back to the United States. Whether you know it or not, America essentially runs on debt. Historically, America's economy has been so big and has grown so fast that taking out tens of billions of dollars here or there hasn't really been much of a big deal because it was such a small percentage of the country's overall economy.
Except for, let's put this in perspective, y'all. When it comes to black folks' reparation, it's a big deal. Remember this? Open your books to chapter 1 if you forgot. Whenever we have these crises that's affecting them, on suddenly, no holds bars, buy up all the bonds, print more money, put $2 trillion in the economy, like a Thanos snap. But when it's you and me, brothers and sisters, no, I'm sorry, y'all. We don't even know how we could put that together. Well, how do we know who we pay? We start off by the people you've been discriminating against. How about that? Let's continue. Hopefully the chickens will come home roosting.
For example, in 2006, the United States had a relatively healthy debt to GDP ratio of about 60%. But then the financial crisis hit. And during the financial crisis, the United States began scrambling for ways to pump money into the economy. So it began taking out hundreds of billions of dollars and eventually trillions of dollars worth of debt. And some people might think that the United States, along with every other country that took out debt to get through the financial crisis, has paid off some of the debt that they accrued in 2008 and 2009. But actually, the opposite is true. You see, since the financial crisis, many developed countries throughout the world have been accruing more and more debt every single year, while economic growth has slowed. This means that many countries may find it actually more difficult to pay off their debt today than they did during the financial crisis. And here's what I mean. The United States debt to GDP ratio before the lockdowns and this pandemic was around 106%. Canada's was around 88%, Italy's was 133%, Singapore's was at 109%, and Japan's was at an astounding 237%. What I'm trying to say here is that before this crisis even hit, the governments around the world were in more debt than they had ever been in. And then, of course, the lockdowns happened and everything began accelerating.
All right. I'm so glad the little brother said that. Before the pandemic hit, did you hear him yell? The world's government was already in crisis economically. Think about it, brothers and sisters. Please think about this. You and your buddies, the leaders of all the other corporations get together. Hey, we got to do something, Charlie. Yeah, Robert, what can you do? Hey, Sean Wing, what can we do? Well, we got a little virus we could release. And that will give us justification for why our economies crap out in the next 7 months. Nothing happens by chance, y'all. And you look to who benefits, brothers and sisters. Brother Frederick, welcome to the show. Peace and power. Let's continue.
Have you ever wondered how all of these checks that citizens are getting today are being paid for? It's not from the government's bank account because most governments don't have a lot of money right now and have little to no tax revenue coming in for the foreseeable future. All of this is coming from debt. So yes, all of the aid packages and stimulus packages that every country in the world is giving out is essentially a form of debt that its tax-paying citizens will have to pay over the next several decades. In fact, if you live in the United States right now, roughly 1 out of every 10 tax dollars that you send to the federal government goes directly towards the interest payment on the national debt and not towards any government programs. And
hopefully you guys are understanding what he's saying. If we are going to pay for the stimulus program, then why are the businesses getting billions of dollars? Remember when I broke it down for you guys about Bloomberg and the $500 million fuck up he did? He could have given every American citizen $1 million. The same thing is true with the bailouts. But no, we can't do that because we want these peasants hungry for work. Seeing how you are all Pharaoh slaves, we're going to make sure that you go into debt for your jobs and you'll fight each other tooth and nails to get those AT&T jobs, get them General Motor jobs, get them Ford jobs. But sadly, you'll probably end up working 2 or 3 McDonald's, Walmart, and Dollar General jobs. Come on now. Hear me. Let's continue.
And after this crisis passes, that number will only get higher. So this brings up a scary scenario. Many countries like the United States will accrue so much debt during these few months that they will be unable to pay for some of their government-funded programs in the future. So things like Social Security, which is already running low on funds, education, military, healthcare, one or all of those things might be seeing major cuts in the future in order to pay for these stimulus packages today. And if a government wants to keep all of these social programs at their current level without accumulating more debt in the near future, it will have to do something that isn't popular with its citizens, which is raise taxes. Now, I would just like to mention that it is highly unlikely that developed countries like the United States, Canada, or the UK will default on its loans, which would send the countries into an even deeper depression. But it is quite likely that the debt that's being accumulated today will end up slowing future economic growth, raising future taxes, and reducing future funding for social programs.
Okay, yeah. Sister Kathy, welcome to the show. Peace and power. I want you to understand, I'm breaking this down so you guys can all easily digest all this, because really, this is a lot of information. The economic thing's going to hit. And like I said in the song, in order to make your economic or your money more valuable, the users have to die. There has to be bloodshed. Keep that in your mind. Now, we'll be wrapping up this economic section, but then we're going to move right into the war section. All right, let's do this. Oh my gosh, let's do it.
And this effect might radiate for decades to come, meaning that kids born today in 2020 will likely be paying for a decent portion of these stimulus packages when they become adults. And the government debt is not the only debt problem that we have in the world right now. You see, before the crisis ever began, households were already racking up record levels of debt too. In 2020, households in the United States had roughly $14 trillion worth of debt, which is the highest debt level in history. And the largest increase in household debt from 2008 to 2020 has come from, of course, student loans. In 2008, student loans accounted for roughly $611 billion worth of household debt. Meanwhile, today, it is roughly $1.6 trillion worth of household debt. And when you throw this all together, you will see that the average household has roughly $100,000 worth of debt. Meanwhile, these same households have on average only $8,000 worth of savings. And for people under the age of 30, it's even worse, as they have on average just $2,700 worth of savings. That is just enough to cover 1 month of housing, food, and insurance for the average person. So what this all means is that going into this crisis, the average person was already living paycheck to paycheck with little to no savings and tons of debt. And this was especially true for younger people. It also means that the $1,200 stimulus checks might be able to help some Americans get by for an extra week or two, but it won't be good enough for a long-term solution. The only way to help people avoid missing rent payments, defaulting on their loans, or being delinquent on their mortgages is to lift the lockdowns across the world, but that might not happen for a while. And I can't help but think that as more and more households become unemployed, that both individual and national debt will begin to pile up in order to stay afloat, and this will happen at record levels that we have never seen before. And that being said, we have already surpassed the 2008 financial crisis in terms of unemployment levels, and it looks like we might be heading for an economic dip that we have not seen since the Great Depression. And depending on what other policies are enacted in the near future, we as taxpayers will likely be paying off this 1 to 3 month period of time for the next several decades to come. But this problem might be a lot worse in the short term for developing countries. In fact, the IMF and World Bank have called for an immediate suspension of debt payments for the world's developing countries, as many are very close to defaulting on their debt. This could create an unprecedented debt crisis in the near future that would likely radiate throughout the entire world. Now, I would just like to mention that central banks are playing a major role in this debt crisis right now and are printing money hand over fist, which is causing a ton of things like inflation and currency devaluation. But it also might help pay down the debt in the future through something called quantitative easing. But that could be a whole video in itself. So who knows? This might be the worst debt crisis the world has ever seen, but maybe not. Only time will tell. What?
Oh boy. And yes, time will most certainly tell. Hold on. Let's see if my computer here can do this without crashing. I'm sorry, y'all. Hopefully the lag's not too bad, but we're going to do this. U.S. debt clock. Oh, you know, this is one of my most favorite places on the whole internet. Let's get this in here where we can see. Oh, look at that. $24 trillion plus, yeah. For those who are interested and care, you know, you essential workers that are actually working still. If you guys was to pony up right now, I'm sure this number probably has radically changed, but it would be $194,613 to cover the nation's debt. But of course, we all know that's not going to happen. You all will get chipped. If you want them government benefits, you're going to get chipped. You want your kids to go to school, they're going to get chipped. You all are going to chip in because you're a bunch of lemons and you have no power. Oh, I did not mean to say that. Oh my God. I'm so tired, y'all. I did not mean to say that. But it's the truth. It is, unfortunately, the truth. Listen to this while we look at the debt. Listen to this, y'all.
The reunification is not done by then. Tell me why you think so.
Yes, I think the issue of whether or not China will use force is dependent on the success of their other strategies to use influence, economics, and diplomacy to pressurize Taiwan into accepting a political deal where they would become part of mainland China in some form or fashion. And China's been trying to work this over the last many years, and they will continue to do that over the course of the next 10 years. But at some point, there's going to be pressure inside the Chinese Communist Party, from especially the military, to argue that, hey, if these other forms of pressure aren't successful, then we're going to have to use military force in order to be able to achieve our grand ceremony in October of 2049, where we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which they talk about all the time, one of the 2 centennial celebrations that they want to have. So I've called this the decade of concern that starts next year, which is the Chinese military was ordered by Hu Jintao and then again by Xi Jinping to have the capability to take Taiwan by military force starting in 2020. So for the last 20 years, it even started under Jiang Zemin, but for the last 20 years, the Chinese military has been building up its military capability. And Xi Jinping has, given them a new organizational structure in 2015, created the Strategic Support Force, the Joint Logistics Force. He's cleaned out a lot of the corruption out of the military, got rid of the areas of the military that had nothing to do with warfighting, and got them focused on being a true warfighting capability. So starting this next year, the Chinese military is going to be thinking that, well, now we have the capability to physically go out and invade Taiwan. Now, some people doubt that they actually have that, but when you read what the Chinese say, and even what Xi has said, they believe that they have that capability. And that belief is only going to get stronger over the next 10 years.
Okay.
And so the question becomes, how late could you use military force in that timeline from 2020 to 2030 to 2040 and use an invasion and then expect the world to come back to Beijing in 2049 and participate in this grand celebration of the 100th anniversary of the PRC? And I think the Chinese have an example in history where they know it's about a 20-year period where the West will forget what they do.
Okay.
And that example was from Tiananmen Square to the Beijing Olympics.
Okay.
That's 19 years, let's say 20. So if you go from 2049 back 20 years, you essentially get to 2030. So from 2020, where they've been told, be ready, have the military capability, till about 2030, maybe 2035, as we get towards the end of that decade, there's going to be great pressure for whoever is leading the PRC to use military force, because they know that if they don't use it, then their ceremony and their celebration will be tarnished, and that the world will still condemn them. And they also know too that, especially with America being non-prepared in this arena, that as America under the new Trump administration starts really gearing itself up to defend Taiwan, that they will be also running out of time. So it's this next 10 years, as I said, is the decade of great concern about what will happen and whether or not the PRC will decide to use military force. So that
the reality is we should be aware that China is maneuvering to strike. Now, I want to touch on the news. So for some of y'all that don't get the news or whatever, I'm going to get her in focus here so that you all can participate and understand and share. That might be too small. I don't know. Anyhow, New York daily death toll reaches third straight record at 799 souls dead. Brother Al, greetings, peace and power. Oh, and look at this. Outbreak aboard second Navy carrier. Like I said, if it gets in our submarine fleet, it's a done deal. We're that big fat vajayjay just waiting to get stuck. And don't let that noodle fool you. Keep on playing around. Keep on playing around. Virus trace found in wastewater at high levels. Remember, I've already talked about that. A lot of your water treatment centers does what? They recycle the water. What they do a shitty job of it. Use shitty chemicals. And some of that juice has the virus in it. Yeah, the water in your tap is really like juice. It's man-made. Or at least man-altered. That's a stupid story. Giant Asian hornets, blah, blah, blah. I don't really see nothing. Couple married, jail same day after flaunting corona rules. Oh my gosh. Hughes and the corona laws are going to be utilized by barbecue Becky's, and they're going to be unleashed upon us. After all, we are going to become the face of the disease. It's going to affect us because, there's so many of us who are fat, diabetic, high blood pressure, taking those pills to eat them pork chops. Like I said, man, you notice, and just look at the funding. Look at the funding, y'all. When we're hitting the rich folks, all of a sudden, oh my God, jumping Jehoshaphat. But now, all that you see more and more urban areas being impacted in minority, brown, black neighborhoods. All of a sudden, we're going to cut off funding for testing. We're just going to roll this shit back. You know why? After recalculating the death panels, and that's what they are. They're death panels, eugenicists. They determine the virus is killing the right people. Mock my words, laugh. You think the shit's funny. But for those of you who understand the totality, the bigger picture, you see just how time is running out for us. And a lot of y'all going down to these hospitals, be careful. Just be careful. If I was you, I'd try to get with some else. Oh my God, TruePower's giving medical advice and he's not a doctor. Ew. So, oh my God, gas prices fall under 80 cents. What a wonderful world. What a wonderful world. Now, of course, if you could go somewhere, that'd be awesome. Sister Kathy, you have to understand. This is a part of a plan. This is why in the very beginning, even though in this show, I noted that, yes, it would appear that Africa wasn't getting the same viral response as the rest of the world. A lot of that has to do with the travel. A lot of people ain't traveling like that. going to little places way out in the back. But then there was other stories, were there not? Where white nationalists was encouraging members to get corona and target minorities purposefully. No one really covered those stories. They went under the radar. But I've seen them. And now you're starting to see the consequence. Right now, our country, this nation, what, 15,000 dead? And they're telling us to take these masks or bandanas and that's supposed to be good. Listen, folks. And I'm saying this not calling anyone nasty. Hopefully this is for people who need to hear this one. You walk outside, you go down the block, you go to maybe the grocery store and come back home. If you do not take off your shoes before you walk into that house, all the loogies and snot balls you stepped on, didn't know you did. All the people coughing and shit, and those particles fell to the ground. You got those on your shoes, buddy. You got them on those high heel pumps, sister. And you bring that stuff in. That's how you get sick. You can wash hands all day. Like I said, this thing has been a huge, huge psychological experiment on the world. And out of the outcome, we get one step closer to getting chipped. Welcome to the show, King James. Peace and power. We get one more step to being chipped. Do not be scared. Do not be fearful. You're not going to stop it. Just like you're not going to stop the one world electric currency. Just know that you always have a choice. And I have to leave it like that. If I say anything to contrary or add or subtract from that, no. You know what I mean. Those who are truly getting this message understand what the I mean. You always have a choice. I pray you choose well. Now, let's get back to this Chinese war in the next 30 years.
And missiles and bombs and all those things that go into a calculation to decide whether or not to go.
Talking about, deterring China, what about the risks associated with attacking Taiwan? Like, China is not a benign neighbor in Asia. Many countries don't like China. So if China really attacks Taiwan, I suppose Vietnam, Japan, all those countries are not going to like it. And also America. So can China take all these countries at the same time, especially America?
So that's exactly what China has been calculating over the last 20 plus years. And they have built and strategized what they call counter-intervention strategy, which is to keep American military forces at arm's length, if you will, outside the second island chain. The vast majority of our forces, there's some that are permanently stationed in the first island chain in bases in Okinawa and main islands of Japan. But for the most part, the majority of U.S. military force would come from the West Coast. And so the Chinese have developed this counter-intervention strategy to be able to sink our aircraft carriers that would come into the region with ballistic missiles designed to sink aircraft carriers, the DF-21D, the DF-26. They've built a whole litany of missiles from shore-based ground launch cruise missiles to air launch cruise missiles to submarine launch cruise missiles to surface ship launch cruise missiles. And then we saw on October 1st in the parade in Beijing, we saw these DF-17, these hypersonic missiles. So they got missiles coming in a ballistic trajectory. They've got missiles coming in on the surface, cruise missiles. They've got hypersonic missiles. So they've got all these missiles coming at our military forces, both those that are in Guam and ships and aircraft that would be coming into the region. So that's their counter-intervention strategy. And they believe that their confidence in their ability to do this is greater and greater than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, as I've been analyzing this, even 20 years ago. So today, and they know, well, Japan's separate because that'll probably the U.S. on this, but they're not afraid of Vietnam. They're not afraid of Cambodia. They're not afraid of South Korea. They're not afraid of the Philippines. They're not afraid of Malaysia. They're not afraid of these other small. They are also betting on the fact that maybe this will be a great deterrent to American morale and will. It's kind of the same way the Japanese thought.
Well, that's interesting. All right. So there you heard from experts, economic expert, geopolitical, Asian expert as well. The drums of war are beating. You can pretend not to hear. You can pretend to believe that the inevitability of WW3. But what's going on in this nation right now should show you at a moment's notice, your world can be turned upside down. That little cushy, bushy job that you have that gets you to be the ultimate consumer of goods can be snatched from you and snuffed out. Your little bank account that you have can be frozen. All I want you to understand is you are quite literally on a global plantation now, y'all. Masses not hooking you up with no shacks, nor shoes, not even rags to wear. As a Pharaoh slave, that is your duty and your obligation to put together some resources that you was not born into and go out and achieve it. And the Senate and the Congress have let you all know by passing this whack-ass stimulus bill that our children and ourselves, obviously, will pay for in perpetuity, damn near. But big business gets the brunt of it, not the people. The $2 trillion, we get a measly, $1 billion, I guess, to split? Not even that. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. But big business gets trillions of dollars. So those families that own those companies are going to be blessed, while you peasants who work the factory, work the restaurant, work the box store, do the labor, you guys are going to get butt raped as usual. I mean, at this point, you just got to call a spade a spade. This will include TPIM SR Live for tonight. I just felt like doing a live show. I know it's pretty late. I want to thank all the chatters. I want to thank everyone who has helped the show, the Patreons, and all of my Patreon folks. I do have some unreleased material. I've been mulling whether to release it or not. I think I will, just for Patreon only, because there's a bunch of videos out there that are just Patreon exclusive. Some Judge, some Mark, some of this, some of that hasn't been released on YouTube. And then the new brothers and sisters who've been showing love on Cashapp. Thank you. And I appreciate it. And I hope you appreciate the show. And I hope you appreciate the information that I try to bring, that I try to demonstrate to the world. Because at the end of the day, I consider you a fellow human. And I want you to thrive. And I want you to live. And I want you to have meaning and purpose for your life other than being a Pharaoh wage slave. So with that being said, live your life of integrity without hate, envy, or greed. And as always, brothers and sisters, please, let's try to be kinder to each other. Peace and power, unity and victory, dignity and respect, liberation. I'm out. you.